This series explores games from the role-playing hobby's history, examining their pros and cons, and taking a look at what can be recommended if you wish to give a game a go. As a Brit that has grown up with tales of King Arthur in all manner of forms and media, today's game, King Arthur Pendragon, or more simply, Pendragon, has something of a privileged place. Is it the Arthurian game that I would write were I inclined so to do? Probably not. But it stands as a labour of love for its author, Greg Stafford, who himself notes it as his gaming masterpiece. From one of the authors of the perennial RuneQuest game, and the primary creator of the fantasy Bronze Age world of Glorantha, that he would choose his take on Arthur's Britain as his self-confessed masterpiece makes it worthy of further investigation in itself. Beyond that, though, it is the collection of game industry awards, award nominations and high-scoring reviews that the game has gathered since its first release in 1985. So, let's get into it. Pendragon's primary author, Greg Stafford, was well known to be a scholar of mythology and mythological constructs. This can be seen in RuneQuest and its default world of Glorantha. I often find it strange, given the breadth of Glorantha, that Stafford is on record as stating that Pendragon was his magnum opus. But then again, sometimes it is easier to create something from whole cloth than it is to jump down the rabbit hole of research that a subject such as Arthurian legend requires. The first edition of King Arthur Pendragon was released by Chaosium in 1985. It was, ostensibly, built upon Chaosium's own house system, Basic Role-Playing, or BRP for short, which is the same system that sits behind classics such as RuneQuest, Call of Cthulhu and Stormbringer. Each of those games steps away from the core BRP system in one way or another, and has been allowed to develop largely independently of the core system itself. Pendragon is no exception. In place of the traditional BRP percentile-based success system is a simplified D20 one. Skills are very much pared down, as are character statistics in general. And into the BRP family, Pendragon introduced passions, which are now a core part of RuneQuest, and personality traits, which in many ways are a better implementation of an alignment system than Dungeons & Dragons' simplified law-chaos good-evil model. We'll talk about more on these when we come to break down the system itself. Core to the game was the Pendragon Campaign, which breaks down the reign of Arthur into historical background. The idea of the campaign was to have the characters play their lives of their characters against its backdrop, with the game master adjusting future events where necessary. In this way, player characters could play a part in famous events from Arthurian legend, or have them occur off-screen, usually a mix of both, during the course of the game. While the game received a handful of other releases, the Grey Knight, Tournament of Dreams, and a sourcebook for noble characters, it is the Pendragon Campaign that stands as the hallmark of this first edition. A second edition was planned, but was ultimately shelved, with Chaosium eventually releasing a third edition in 1990. Again, with a handful of supporting supplements. Knights Adventurous, which provided more character options. Blood and Lust, a compilation of helpful notes and adventures. Savage Mountains, a region sourcebook for Cambria. The Boy King, the first half of a revision of the Pendragon campaign. Perilous Forest, another region sourcebook, this time covering the northwest of England. And the Spectre King, a compilation of adventures. The third edition wasn't that long-lived, with the fourth edition coming from Chaosium in 1993. This is my favourite edition for reasons I'll go into later in this video. The book compiled a lot of alternate character generation backgrounds and included magic and magicians. Chaosium only released a few books: Beyond the Wall, a source book for the northern extents of Britain, a second edition of The Boy King, Pagan Shore, a region sourcebook for Ireland, Land of Giants, a sourcebook describing Scandinavia and the tale of Beowulf, and Lordly Domains, a sourcebook for nobles, including rules for managing fiefs. The rights to the game were passed on to Green Knight Publishing in 1999, who published their own print of 4th edition and reprinted Lordly Domains and a revised edition of Tales of the Spectre King. They also released a cut-down version of 4th edition without the alternative character types and magic, resembling somewhat the model used for the core of 1st and 3rd editions, in the shape of the Book of Knights. Other Green Knight volumes from this period include Saxons, Tales of Chivalry and Romance, Tales of Magic and Miracles, and Tales of Mystic Tournaments. Now we come to the somewhat all-over-the-map tale of Pendragon 5th edition. White Wolf imprint Art House teamed up with Greg Stafford to assemble a hardcover edition in 2005, which was accompanied in 2006 by probably the greatest treatise on the Age of Arthur in role-playing, the Great Pendragon Campaign. This weighty volume is a much expanded revision of the Pendragon Campaign, but the core game rulebook trimmed back to its original pre-4th edition Knights-only premise. White Wolf brought the game in-house in 2008, re-releasing Pendragon 5th and the Great Pendragon Campaign, before Nocturnal Media acquired the game, having been founded by White Wolf co-founder Stuart Wyke. Nocturnal released a revised version, releasing it in 2010 as 5.1. Nocturnal worked with Greg to bring these volumes under the 5.1 banner. Between 2010 and 2015, these were released as the Book of Armies, the Book of Battle, 2 editions under 5.1, the Book of Knights and Ladies, the Book of the Manor, the Book of the Entourage, the Book of Records, Volumes 1, Knights, and 2, Battles, 2 editions of the Book of the Estate, which simplified and replaces the Book of the Manor largely, the Book of the Warlord, the Book of Uther, which provides more information of Uther's reign and extends the Great Pendragon Campaign timeline further pre-Arthur and the marriage of Count Roderick. Nocturnal then revised Pendragon and released 5.2 in 2016, additionally running a Kickstarter in 2017 to depict the world of Charlemagne using the Pendragon rules in the Paladin role-playing game. Pendragon returned home to Chaosium in 2018, with Greg Stafford working on a 6th edition. Chaosium also published the Paladin game and a book of scenarios, Paladin Adventures, following Stuart Wyke's death in 2017. With Greg's death in 2018, progress on a new edition of Pendragon has obviously been slow in the making, but Chaosium did manage to release a free Quick Start sampler version of a new 6th edition in 2020, and currently have the full game slated for release sometime in 2023. As noted, Pendragon is an iteration of Chaosium's basic role-playing. The major difference here, as far as the system itself goes, is that while BRP uses percentiles for registering skills and rolling for success, Pendragon uses a D20-based system. The premise is the same. Roll dice equal to or under the required trait for success. Critical success is achieved when the exact number of the trait is rolled. If you have a skill of 18 and you roll an 18, then you have achieved a critical. Fumbles are achieved on a roll of 20, unless a 20 would otherwise be a success. Traits over 20 translate into a bonus to the die roll, equal to the amount the trait exceeds 20. For example, a skill of 24 translates into a dice roll of 1d20 plus 4 when rolling. In this instance, there being no chance to fumble, and any roll of 16 or above results in a critical. Opposed rolls are made by taking the highest roll that succeeded as the winner. This then accounts for the higher trait values being more likely to succeed against lower ones. There are a number of traits that feed into the various rolls made during play. Statistics, physical ones only in this game, strength, constitution, dexterity, size and appearance, as mental characteristics are specifically omitted. Skills, a subset of the range offered by BRP with a handful of setting additions, but on the whole a minimal list. Personality traits and passions. These latter two are important to the game and make it stand out from other BRP games within the context of the chivalric Arthurian setting it portrays. There are 13 pairs of personality traits, which describe opposing facets of a character's personality. For example, chaste versus lustful, merciful versus cruel, trusting versus superstitious, and so on. These traits have a sliding scale in one direction or another. Under normal circumstances, the values of each opposing pair sum to 20. For example, chaste 15 versus lustful 5. In basic character generation, these start at a set of default values. Advanced character generation options adjust them around somewhat, particularly if the character being played is not a knight cut in the chivalric Christian form of the Arthurian tales. Passions are a measure of things the character is passionate about: loyalty to liege, honour, hatred of enemies, and so on. They begin again in basic generation with default values. Both personality traits and passions come into play when circumstances arise that are affected by them. Roles made against them in some way dictate the way in which a character reacts to a circumstance. For example, when faced by a flirtatious and beautiful fey woman, the knight might roll against chaste to resist her charms, or lustful to completely give in to them. It's the games master's job, perhaps prompted by the scenario at hand, to determine which. Skills, personality traits and passion can improve with experience and situation and can change over the course of play. Experience is handled in the same way, a general way, as BRP. Use of a trait that is deemed good enough to potentially learn from earns a check. All checked traits might improve by making successful experience rolls. Within Pendragon, experience rolls are carried out during a year's winter phase. On the subject of time, Pendragon breaks down time into 4 scales: narrative time, scenario time, battle rounds, and combat rounds. Narrative time is simply a description of an amount of time passing, usually measured in days or weeks. Scenario time is shorter, hours or minutes, and provides a window for characters to actively do stuff during the course of an adventure or event. Battle rounds are used in the field of war and are around 30 minutes per round. Large battles use battle rounds, and characters interact with battles in a personal way, while the flow of the fight goes on around them. In this way, the game, which, given the nature of it, is rife with large battles, doesn't bog down into a glorified war game, and retains the role-playing focus. Combat rounds are used when things do get up close and personal, and a blow-by-blow action of individual combat is needed. Play itself is organised into years. A year begins with a winter phase, where accounting is done, experience rolls are made, and so on. During the course of a year, characters interact with the world around them, manage their estates, and potentially engage in battles and adventure. The general rule of thumb is that a single game session is representative of a year of game time, although some years may take more than one session to resolve. As for characters themselves, the default is that players portray Christian knights associated with the realm of Arthur, although expansions to this default add female characters, characters from other backgrounds such as Picts, Northmen and Saxons, and character types other than knights, including magicians. It should be noted that only the 4th edition of Pendragon presents rules for magic and magicians, magic generally being an aspect of the Arthurian world left to the Games Master to manage as a part of the background. The real masterpiece of the game, though, comes with the Great Pendragon Campaign. This is a year-by-year catalogue of events, covering 485 to 566, the game's postulated timeline from Uther's wars against Gorloy to the tragic end of Arthur's reign. With the Book of Uther, or the Uther period expansion, which is included in the Book of Uther, but also available separately, the timeline for the campaign is extended by an additional 5 years to start in 480. The premise for the campaign is for players to follow Pendragon's default mode, that is, by playing knights, and to play those characters and their heirs through the various phases of the Arthurian epic. In Pendragon's case, drawing heavily from Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. Britain, it states, progressed through an anachronistic and undocumented period during this time, possibly due to some form of enchantment, that later collapsed following the death of Arthur back into the history that we know today. For each year or period in the timeline, the Great Pendragon Campaign provides an entry of events, courts, battles, and technological advances, smattered liberally with numerous adventure seeds for the knight characters to engage with. The player characters are not simply passengers on the timeline either. They play an active part in it, if they so choose, and perhaps even alter the course of pseudo-history to paint a very different tale to that which legend tells us. For me, the Great Pendragon Campaign and its predecessors are the main attraction. I speak at length within my Arthurian Ramble video of what Arthur means to me. and some of the background to this real or imagined nature of this king and his realm. What Greg Stafford achieved with the campaign is to mix all sorts of Arthurian source into a coherent tapestry, using Mallory as the backbone and this perceived uncharted and anachronistic period of legend as a frame. There are influences from Monmouth, Chrétien, and the earlier works that influenced them woven into it, and even references to movies such as Excalibur. It is a heady mixture for someone that loves Arthurian mythology. Someone, for example, like me. Beyond this core, that is, rules for knights performing knightly activities against an Arthurian backdrop, the Pendragon game presents numerous options. Most of these, such as found within the Book of Battles, the Book of the Estate and so on, add detail and complexity to systems presented in a more abstract way in the core rules. If you wish to include such detail, then these volumes are worth picking up, but the game does not need them to have fun. One last mechanic that Pendragon uses that is unique to it over all the other BRP games is that of glory. Characters acquire glory by performing heroic deeds, and once they've accumulated enough glory, then they become heroes. They are ranked as heroes and they gain bonuses to their attributes because of that. It provides an impetus to play that heroic knightly character, the direct rewards of actually getting involved in the story and progressing it through. Before I wrap up the play section, I'd like to delve a little more into the matter of editions. There are 7 editions of the game. 1st, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 5.1, 5.2 and 6th. As with most Chaosium games, there is little difference between the mechanics of them, and books from any edition are largely compatible with any other edition. The standout edition for me is 4th. This edition has both fans and detractors. It is the only edition that presents a magic system and magician characters, and the only edition that folds alternate character types into the core rules. For me, this makes the game more flexible. With 4th, you can do everything that every other edition can do, plus that bit more. I wouldn't suggest using the character generation options to create a mixed group of knights, Saxons, magicians and others around the table, such as might be the case in other games, but rather it enables the game to go beyond Arthur. This is shown in the Land of Giants book. Here we are presented to source material and character options for Scandinavia, but more importantly, we are given an example of how a non-Arthurian slice of literature can be modelled using the Pendragon rules. This is in the shape of the Epic of Beowulf, right from Grendel to the final confrontation with a dragon. So, once you've done playing through the Great Pendragon Campaign, the Pendragon game doesn't just become a collector of dust on the shelf. It can continue to be useful in all sorts of ways. Maybe you fancy a stab at putting together a Great Kalevala or Mabinogion or Edda campaign. The rules have everything that you need, and the Great Pendragon Campaign is the ultimate example of how they can be used. Only one essential is needed, and that is the core rules. The first edition box or the books of any of the other editions. My recommendations would be 4th, if you wish the variety and magic systems, 5.2 if you want to be current as of the time of this video, or hold out for 6th if you want to be really, really current when that comes out. If you want a taster of what the game is like, get the free 6th edition Quick Start book. Obviously, the Great Pendragon Campaign is something that I consider an essential, but if you don't fancy playing through an 80-odd year epic, then it might not be for you. If you're into Arthurian legend, though, whether you want to play the thing or not, I would urge you to get it. The work that Greg Stafford put into it is immense. The thing makes for a good read beyond the game. The other books for the game are not essential. As noted, they add more detail to various aspects of the game. I would suggest that you start by playing with the basics first, and if your players start hankering for detail, let that guide you towards which book of volumes you should pick up, of which the Book of the Estate and the Book of Battle I consider most useful. The game thrives pretty well without them, though. King Arthur Pendragon is a gem amongst role-playing games. It presents a strong theme and represents that theme in both source and rules. It's perhaps one of the most underrated of the basic role-playing stable of games, maybe because of its theme, maybe in spite of it. The system itself is simple to pick up and enables players to immerse themselves into the mythology of the Arthurian tales. To that end, the Great Pendragon Campaign is one of the standout works of the role-playing hobby as a whole, and when coupled with the Pendragon rules, creates food for 2 to 5 years of regular play, depending on frequency of gaming session. It is also a source of Arthurian literature in general, and actually operates well as a reading companion to Le Morte d'Arthur and the broader Arthurian canon. All in all, Pendragon stands as one of the best thematic role-playing games ever published. Hopefully, Chaosium can continue that trend when its 6th edition finally makes print.